Hello class, and welcome to part 2 of time management. This should be your second lecture of week 7, and I've just been informed by the registry that in light of recent changes this will now be a 9-week semester. So once we finish this lecture we should only have 2 more weeks to go of teaching time, that is. Well, last class we talked about the opportunity cost of time. We also had an introduction to the critical path method, and we're going to go a little bit more into that today, have an example that we can work out together. And we also had an introduction to the theory of slack or float. Basically how much a project can be delayed without causing irreparable damage to the duration of the project in its entirety. Well, the type of slack we talked about last lecture was something called total slack. I'm going to introduce you to another kind of slack called free slack. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages of the critical path method. And then I'm going to talk to you about Gantt charts. Now, Gantt charts are kind of like another methodology from the critical path method, but really more than a methodology. They're a way of communicating communicating schedules to people. I'm also going to give you another quick introduction to Microsoft Project in terms of basically just showing you some screenshots of Microsoft Project. Next week we'll talk about time management and as it relates to Kurdistan. So just a little word of advice. I tend to say slack. I think in the last lecture I was talking about total slack. Now, depending on what book you get out of the library, or if you see other resources online, they may be referring to something called float, not sloat, but float. So I don't know why we just have 2 words for the same thing here in the English language world. I think float is the American English way of saying things, and slack is the British English way of saying things. I think. I could be wrong there. So it's just something like you say tomato, I say tomato. It means the same thing. So if you read float in one of the textbooks, just know it's slack, or vice versa. And I don't care which word you personally use. So let's just have a little bit of a recap. I thought we would have a go at trying to do a CPM analysis together. So here we have a project, and this project is split up into 8 different activities. There they are, activities A to H. And the prerequisites, those are the activities that must occur before that activity can commence. And we're also given the estimated durations of each of those activities. Now we've got to actually work out the early start and early finish dates for each. We also need to work out the late start and late finish dates. And also we need to work out the total slack for the project activities. Now, the way that I'm going to do this is, if you look at the box down on the left-hand corner, the name of the activity will be in the center. In the 4 corners, you will have early start, early finish, late start, and late finish, respectively. And that D in the top of the box, that represents duration. That's going to be the number, which means the number of days it takes to do the activity. And then on top of the box, I'm going to write in blue the total slack for that activity. Okay, so that's the interface that we're going to use. You don't have to do it this way if you do CPM, but that's the way I'm going to do it. just so that we have good communication as to what the next slide looks like. So here we go. The first thing we need to do is we need to arrange all of the activities in order of the prerequisites. So the first activity is activity A. That's the only activity that has no prerequisites, and the duration is 3 days. And because it's the very first activity, we know that the early start and early finish will be exactly the same as the late start and the late finish. So it's going to start on day 1 and finish on day 3. Remember, it's inclusive, so day 1, day 2 and day 3 are 3 days. The next one will be activity B. And remember this, that right now we can no longer do the late start and late finish. We can only do the early start and early finish. To work out the late start and late finish, we have to work backwards. So the activity B, its early start date would be day 4 because it happens after activity A, and its early finish date is day 3. The duration is 4, so it's going to finish at the end of day 7. And then the same thing for activity C. That's going to be a duration of 2, but it starts its early start on day 4 and it finishes at the end of day 5. Activity D, the prerequisite for activity D is B, so it comes off B. It starts on an early start date of day 8, duration of 12 days. E, that's the prerequisite of E is C, so it comes off C, and its early start date is 6 because it must start after C is finished, which finishes on the early finish date of day 5. It's got a duration of 1 day, so it starts on day 6, it finishes on day 6. That's activity E. Activity F, this also has a prerequisite of C. It comes off C. Duration of 2, so it finishes on day 7. Now, let's look at activity G for a moment. Activity G, what's that? Well, that's actually got 2 prerequisites, activity D and activity E. Now, activity D, that finishes on day 12 as the early finish day, and activity E finishes on day 6, early finish day. Now, activity G must start after the latest early finish date of its prerequisites. Therefore, it can only begin as an early start date of day 13. It can't happen before that. And it's a duration of 4 days, so it finishes on day 16. Now, the final activity is H, and its prerequisites are G and F. Now, if G is finishing on day 16 and F is finishing on day 7, that means H must come after the latest early finish date of the prerequisites. So it starts early start date of day 17 and an early finish day of day 19. So again, it's inclusive, so day 17, day 18, day 19 is 3 days. Now, that's as far as we've gone. We've been able to make the network, how all of the activities are arranged and connect to one another, their prerequisites and also their successors. And we've also done the early start and early finish dates of each of them. Now, what's the next step? The next step is we need to do the late start and late finish. So, assuming the project is not delayed, we work backwards here. We go from the final activity, which is H, and because we know the project will not be delayed, well, we're assuming the project's finish date will not be delayed. The late finish date and the late start date is the same as the early start date, and the late finish date is the same as the early finish date. So 17 and 19 respectively for H. So what do we then do after that? Well, we know that G must finish before H. So if the late start date is day 17 for H, that means G, the late finish date, is day 16. A duration of 4 days means the late start date is 13 days. Now, what about F? Well, F, this is different from the early start and early finish date for F. We actually have total slack with F. Now, we know that its successor is day 17, the late start date. So F's late finish date is the same as the late finish date for G. It's day 16. And the duration of 2 days will tell you that its late start date is day 15. Okay, next step, let's look at C. Well, C, C, this is a little bit different. This is a little bit out of order, isn't it? We'll come back to C. Let's look at D first, okay? So D, that must finish before the late finish date of D must finish before the late start date of G, so it finishes on day 12, and day 8 is the late start date. Now, you should be noticing now that some of the boxes, the early start date is the same as the late start date, and the early finish date is the same as the late finish date. That's because it's on the critical path. It has 0 total slack. Now let's look at E now. Well, E, just like D, it's a prerequisite of G, and if G has a late start date of 13 days, E has a late finish date of day 12. Day 13, I was meant to say, not 13 days. And if the duration of E is 1, then the early start date the late start date of E is day 12. Now let's look at C. Now C has 2 successors, doesn't it? It's got 2 successors, E and F. Now F, the late start date is day 15, and E, the late start date is day 12. Now C must finish before the earliest late start date of its successors. So it's going to have a late finish date of day 11. If the duration is 2 days, then its late start date will be day 10. Let's now look at B. B, it only has 1 successor, that's D, which has a late start date of day 8. So B's late finish date will be day 7. Likewise, because it's got a duration of 4 days, its late start date will be day 4. Now let's look at A. A, we know, has 2 successors, C and D. C has a late start date of day 10. B has a late start date of day 4. A must be finished before its successors, so it will finish before B. So the late start date for A will be day 3, and its late finish date will be day 3, and late start date will be day 1. So we've got there, haven't we? Now we need to focus on total slack. But can you see right now where the critical path is? I hope you can. It goes from A to B to D to G to H. And you know that because all of the early start dates are the same as the late start dates. The early finish dates are the same as the late finish dates. You cannot afford to have any delays on these activities. If you delay these activities, you're going to delay the entire project. So when you see that, you know that total slack is 0 all through there, because early finish date minus late finish date minus early finish date equals 0. Late start date minus early start date equals 0. That's total slack. So for all of those, the total slack is 0. Now, what about F? Well, if we take the late finish date, day 16, and we take away the early finish date of day 7, we're left with 9 days. Likewise, if we did it with the start dates, the late start date of day 15 minus the early start date of day 6 would also give you 9 days. That's the total slack of F. And G and E, we've got a late start date of 12 and an early start date of 6, so it's going to be 6 days. C, we will have 6 days of slack there, and there we've completed this activity. Now we've done all of the total slacks, and we can then go from there and use the critical path method for managing the project schedule. Now, a quick word about slack. Slack, I think, is a better word than float, just because it sort of gives you a better idea of what's happening. You know when I don't know if you know if there's an expression in English where we say cut him some slack, and that means go easy on someone. So, but especially if you are really stressed with your work, with all of your assignments and everything, with your modules, and you came to me and said, "Sir, could we have an extension for one of the assignments?" And I kept saying no. One of you could say, "Oh, sir, please cut us some slack," meaning this is not critical, is it, sir, that it needs to be done by this time? Surely this is not on the critical path. There's some slack that we can utilize here. And so I kind of like the word slack. It gives you an idea of how much time we can exceed the planned duration of an activity without causing any further delays. Now, so far, we've only talked about total slack. So total slack is the amount of time that a duration can be exceeded, a duration of an activity, without causing a delay to the entire project. So for those activities on the critical pathway analysis, they have total slack of 0 days, meaning if the duration of any of those activities was to exceed the estimate, it's going to push back the entire date of the delivery of the project. Now there's another kind of slack which is slightly different to total slack, and this is the amount of time that a duration can be exceeded without causing delays to any of the next activities, to any of its successors. So total slack, it causes a delay to the entire project. Free slack, it can cause a delay to the entire project, but also its immediate successor. So that's the difference between free slack and total slack. So let's have an example of that. So just remember, free slack, it's slightly different. The first thing you need to remember is that if you look at that bottom equation there, the free slack of an activity is always equal to or less than total slack. That means if you have an activity on the critical pathway and it has a total slack of 0, it will also have a free slack of 0 because you can't have a negative slack. Now, how do you work out the free slack? Well, it's a little bit different to total slack, but yeah, the free slack is basically you take the minimum early start or the earliest of the early starts of all of the successes. So if you've got 2 successes for an activity, one starts on day 7 and the other one starts on day 10, you take the one that begins on day 7. And then you minus the early start date for that activity that you're trying to find the free slack for. And you then take away the duration of that activity. So this is how you find free slack. It'll probably be easier to understand this once we start doing examples, but you're basically trying to find out how much you can delay an activity and extend its duration beyond what was estimated without causing delays to the next activities. So let's have a go at this. So we've already done this example for total slack. Let's do a 4th step now. With the exact same project, we now need to work out free slack for each activity. So look at the box in the bottom left. It's the same layout as before, with activity in the middle, duration in the top center, early start, early finish, late start, late finish in the 4 corners. And we have in blue the total slack on top. And at the bottom in purple, we're going to put the free slack. So let's have a look at this. That's the example that we had. Okay, so pay close attention to this because I may well ask you to do this for assignment 6. Hint, hint. Now, let's think about this. We've got to find the free slack. Now, the first step, the first hint that I would give you is to remember the free slack is always the same or less than total slack. So the total slack where it's 0, you know the free slack is going to be 0, meaning that's the critical path. You cannot delay an activity on the critical path without causing delays to the next project, the next activity. And likewise, you would cause a delay to the entire project as a whole. But then we need to actually look at the remaining activity boxes there. Well, let's look at the equation again. For activity F, what is the free slack of activity F? Well, it is the early start date of activity H, because that is the only successor of F. It's the minimum early start date, earliest early start date, and we take away the early start date of F, which is day 6, and then we take away the duration of F. So what day is the early start date of H? It's day 17. And the early start date of F is day 6. And the duration of F is 2. So 17 minus 6 minus 2. That gives you a free slack for F as being 9. And remember, free slack needs to be equal to or less than the total slack. And right there we can see that, yeah, it is equal to or less than the total slack. The total slack is 9 and the free slack is 9. Now, let's look at E. E, the free slack of E, equals the early start of G. There's only one successor for E, so that is day 13 is the early start for G, minus the early start for E, which is day 6, minus the duration of E, which is 1. So 13 minus 6 minus 1, that gives you 6. The free slack of E is 6. Now let's look at C here. This is where free slack and total slack start looking differently, because C is the only activity, if you see on this network, that has two successes. Two things must come after C. Well, here, what is C? We have the minimum early start date of E or F. Well, the early start date of E is day 6, and the early start date of F is day 6. So they actually start on the same day, thankfully. So, but it's day 6. Now, the early start date of C is F. Now, what is going to be the duration of C? That's 2. So the early start date of C is 4, and the duration of C is 2. Now, look what happens here. Suddenly, the free slack is 0, meaning with C, the total slack is 6, but the free slack is 0, meaning that if we were to delay C by 5 days, it will not necessarily cause a delay to the entire project. However, it will cause a delay to E and F, and if they are delayed, potentially they could delay the entire project, potentially, because basically if you have 0 free slack, that means that the free slack is the slack which is specific to your activity. Total slack, this is passed on to other activities on your pathway. So you can see C and E. The total slack in C is sort of basically passed on to its successors, E and F. But for the more, if you're trying to find how much slack you have for your particular work package without causing delays to any of your other teammates working on other work packages, you need to look at free slack. So potentially free slack is a little bit more useful for time management than total slack, potentially. So why do we need to know free slack? Well, total slack, that tells us how our delays will affect the project in its entirety, but free slack tells us how our delays will affect other activities that are surrounding us, how it affects the successor activities. And this may help us allocate our resources more efficiently when we take more account of the free slack than we do for the total slack. I'll try and give you an example here. Okay, we've got a project happening here. Now, these are 3 different activities in the critical path method, okay, the CPM analysis. And that little dotted blue line in the middle is just a way to show you that actually the 2 boxes in the bottom, the activities, they are related to one another. The one in the top right, that's on a different pathway, okay? It doesn't actually have any connection. So let's look at the project, the activity, sorry, in the bottom left. You've got Cardo, who's responsible here for excavating the sub-base. So I think the project is, you're probably making a road together, guys. Now, Cardo, he's got an early start date of day 13 and an early finish date of day 22 and a duration of 10 days to excavate the sub-base. But his successor is Avan, laying the base course. And he's thinking, gosh, you know what? Look at that. I have so much slack I have 16 days of slack here, total slack. I can delay my project by 16 days. I don't know, maybe I can go and buy ice cream, or maybe, yeah, tell someone that I've got to go to a wedding, or pull a sickie. It's not going to affect anyone if I take my time about excavating the subbase. And so rather than finishing on day 22, he actually finishes on day 35. What should have taken him 10 days has actually taken him about 23 days, just so you know. But he's thinking, it's fine, I have 16 days of total slack, but I only use 13 days of that slack. But the issue is that total slack is not for him to exploit solely inside the activity. It is for that pathway together to exploit. So the next activity box, you've got lay base course for Yvonne, and she's got 16 days of total slack, 10 days of free slack. But look, suddenly if Cardo has finished this his activity of excavating subbase on day 35, suddenly Yvonne doesn't have a lot of slack. She only has 3 days of slack remaining to her in terms of total slack, and she has to begin the project, or the activity of laying the base course, on day 36. But look what happens. Meanwhile, in a different critical pathway, on a different pathway, which is the critical pathway with 0 total slack and 0 free slack, from day 31 to day 33, Yvonne must lay the pipeline. That is critical path. But suddenly, by Cardo delaying his activity, he's affecting Yvonne, and Cardo's thinking it doesn't matter, Yvonne's activity of laying the base course isn't critical path, but actually Yvonne is involved in a critical activity on the critical pathway of laying the pipeline. So do you see what's happened here? Cardo, because he didn't consider that he was only considering total slack, his sluggishness in completing the activity has actually affected Yvonne, and that in turn has actually affected the critical pathway, and that will delay the project. Because this is the big weakness. If you're looking for a big disadvantage of critical pathway method, is it doesn't tell you how resources are allocated. So you could have people, human resources, allocated to different activities, and some of those activities could be critical path, others not. This is typical anyway. If you're a project member for any sort of, or any kind of business, any kind of employment, you're never ever going to be working on one activity at a time. You'll always have multiple fires to fight. And even here at university, you've got to do 4 or 5 modules at a time. You can't just do one module for 3 weeks, then move on to another module and do that intensively. It doesn't work that way. And so, because the critical pathway method doesn't take into account how resources are allocated, the free slack is actually a better way of communicating to team members the urgency that they need to place on completing an activity, much better than a total slack, in my opinion. So, some little characteristics of the critical pathway method and some advantages. One is that it's quite easy to identify which activities can run parallel and which activities have to run in series. it's quite nice how it's displayed in a network like that. You can see quite clearly where the prerequisites are, where the successes are. And also, this is questionable, but I would say, yeah, you can see there's multiple pathways with the critical path method. But if you look closely, and depending on how you lay it out, if you lay it out the way I do with the early start, early finish, late start, late finish in the four corners, it's very easy to quickly identify which critical path and which activities on the critical path are critical. So yeah, it's easy to see where the critical path is. Sometimes, depending on the layout, maybe not so. It also shows activities dependencies very clearly. So yeah, it shows you where the prerequisites are. And that in turn is very similar to point 1 there. You can identify which activities can run parallel, and that means that you can reduce the overall duration of the project. And it also helps to identify slack time. Slack time is very important for time management, total slack and free slack. Now, some disadvantages for the critical path method is the scheduling of personnel is not handled by the CPM. So just like we had that problem before 2 slides ago where Cardo was thinking, I can go easy on my activity, it's not going to affect the project. Well, actually it did, because it affected Avan, and Avan, she actually had work on the critical pathway that week. And likewise with personnel resources, it may not be people, it might be machinery. If you've only got one digger on the site and you delay and the digger is being used on multiple activities which are on different pathways, if you are using the digger for your activity and there's a delay to the delivery of your activity, it's not only going to delay the activities that are successes to your project, it will affect the ones which are off your pathway because the digger was needed elsewhere. The critical pathway and the duration is not always obvious to see. I think that's the critical pathway. If it's a very simple project, it's pretty easy to see, and if you lay it out like I do with the 4 boxes and the 4 corners, it's a bit easier. But when projects get more complicated and bigger and you've got a lot more activities, it does get quite complicated to find. And the duration of you've also got to estimate the durations for each activity, and it's quite hard to obviously see what is the duration of the entire project. You've actually got to go through all of the activities on the critical path and add their durations together. So that can take a little bit of time. And the other thing with the critical pathway method is it doesn't show you the status of each activity. So I'm the project manager sitting in my office, I'm looking at the critical pathway method, and I know that I've got Cardo and Avan and Yar, they're all out on site working on different activities, and I'm wondering, I wonder how well they're doing. Are they going to deliver these activities on time or not? Well, it's quite hard to see that on the critical pathway method. There isn't really a way that Cardo, Avan and Yar can update the critical pathway method in real time so that the project manager in the site office can track it. Now the other real this is really the big disadvantage with the critical pathway method, and this is why we don't really use it that much in civil engineering, except really in the very preliminary stages, is networks can get really confusing on bigger projects. So that example that I gave you before, how many activities were there? There were 9. Did you think that was pretty confusing? Well, maybe you're thinking, oh, it's pretty much my limit at the moment, sir. I'm pretty new to all this time management. I wouldn't want it to be much more complicated than that. Well, that's a picture right there of the project 150-meter road. It's currently being built in the north of Erbil. It's going to be worth, I think, around 200 million US. It's about 70 k's of motorway, very wide road, wider than a 120-meter road. How many activities are in the time management schedule for that project? Well, I did speak to the planner, the person in charge of the time schedule for this project. He said there's actually currently about 300 activities. Are you going to be able to do a critical pathway method with 300 activities? Well, you're going to need some good software to do that. If so, it's going to get pretty confusing. And the thing is, I think time management and project management generally is done very poorly in Kurdistan. I think that project, 150 meters of road, 150-meter road, only having 300 activities, that's a very basic level schedule for such a project. I actually think such a project would normally, if this was done in a place like Japan or Korea, it would probably have over 1,000 activities. So you're just not going to be able to do a critical pathway method to that level of accuracy. So yeah, how many activities are there in the project plan for 150-meter road? 200 or 300 currently, and that's with a very basic Kurdistan level plan. Other countries, it would probably be a lot higher. They would break down the activities into much smaller units. So just to give you an idea of some confusion here, so this is a CPM network, and how many activities are there? I think you've got 17 activities. Suddenly it's getting a little bit more confusing, isn't it? And you can see all the boxes in yellow. That's the critical pathway. Well, let's go a step further. This is an activity on arrow type critical pathway method. That's why the interface looks a little bit different. But boy, it's beginning to get pretty confusing here, isn't it? Well, it gets even more confusing. This is actually this is a project. This is an electrical engineering project that I was involved in, just in terms of the project management, nothing technical. I know nothing about electricity, even though I worked in the industry for 5 years. It's getting pretty confusing there, though, isn't it? Well, this is actually another critical pathway method. This one was actually done for a software project, a very large software project. Isn't that confusing? You can't even see what's going on there. Each of those little orange circles, you can click on them and the information would pop up, but that's a very, very confusing critical pathway method. And so, and the interesting thing is, I think that's only 150 activities or so. So yeah, remember, with civil engineering projects, there's usually a lot of activities you want to break it down into. So the critical pathway method, it's got a lot of benefits to it, but yeah, it's probably not going to be your day-to-day running of the time management of a project. So with that said, with that big disadvantage stated, I now want to go into Gantt charts. So Gantt charts are not so much a methodology, but a way of displaying a schedule, which is potentially a little bit easier for civil engineering anyway, for the critical pathway method. And this was developed by an engineer and also a social scientist called Henry L. Gantt in 1917. So this actually predates the critical pathway method. The critical pathway method was sort of developed at around World War II, I'm told, for a lot of projects during the wartime. Now, rather than activities being shown as boxes or arrows, like in the critical pathway method, the activities are shown as bars. And so it's basically a bar graph. And the important thing you need to know is that the length of the bar, that shows you the duration of the activity. The longer the bar, the longer the activity duration. And some bars come off other bars, and that is because they are dependent. They are successors of the bars that come before it. If the bars run parallel with one another, they are not dependent. So it's actually a very good way of displaying schedules, and it's really popular in civil engineering. You're going to see a lot of these, I think, in your career, Gantt charts, and yeah, they're a lot easier to look at than critical pathway method networks. So this is an example here of a Gantt chart, and this is for the construction of a residential house, and what you're looking at is actually a screenshot from Microsoft Project. So Microsoft Project is a really good piece of software that can be used for making schedules for projects, and you can actually display work as a critical pathway method network using Microsoft Project, but what people normally do is they would display it as a Gantt chart. So in the left-hand column you have all of these activities, and each activity, they also have a duration assigned to them. So just like the critical pathway method, you've got to estimate the duration for each activity. But one of the things which is very useful is that activities can be broken down into sub-activities. So you can see there the activity of foundation, 42 days. Well, that's been broken down into 8 different activities, all joining to one another. And so I have to say that is just so helpful from a project management point of view. Sometimes you don't want to see thousands of different activities. You need to just see the key activities being displayed, or you don't need it broken down further. And also the planner, he can probably, the person in charge of keeping the schedule for a project, he can give rough plans and do the subheadings, but the smaller intricate details, well, the engineers at the coalface who know all about foundation design and foundation building, they need to actually work on the schedule for the finer points. Now, once you have that, there are other boxes you can fill in, such as start dates and so forth. It's displayed on the Gantt chart on the right, and you can see that each activity is represented by a bar, and it stretches from the start date to the end date. And one of the other things you can notice is that for activities which are prerequisites of other activities which are dependent, they are joined up with arrows, and that means that they can't run parallel. They need to happen at different times. But if the activities overlap, then they're not actually dependent. So an example here would be what is it? On line 36, the dry-in with the duration of 22 days. I have no idea what that is, dry-in. Maybe someone in structural engineering can tell us. And on line 47, utility rough-ins and completes co. I don't know what that means. But you can see that those two bars, they actually overlap. They are not dependent on one another. And so they can be done at the same time. They can run parallel. So that's an example of a Gantt chart. This is another example of a Gantt chart. So this is a reverse engineering project. So reverse engineering is basically where it doesn't happen too much in civil engineering, but where you're given a piece of infrastructure that someone else has designed, and you've been told to figure out how it all works. So this actually happens a little bit in mechanics and electrical engineering a lot, where one company will come out with a new product. So let's say it's a car. Let's say Toyota brings out the latest version of the Land Cruiser, and then Nissan will buy a Land Cruiser, and they will get their engineers to do a reverse engineering project on the Land Cruiser, which means they basically destroy the Land Cruiser, they take it all apart and try to learn as much as they can about how the Land Cruiser works, so that they can copy it and maybe even improve on it when they do their design, the Nissan Pathfinder or whatever it is. That's reverse engineering. Now you can see in this Gantt chart we've got various tasks. Some of them are overlapping, some of them are overlapping just a small amount. But look at the bottom activity, writing the final report. Well, that can actually, there's no reason why you can't begin that activity at way back in February. There's no reason why you can't start writing the final report. You have to finish writing the final report once everything's done, but there's no reason why you can't start it early. It doesn't actually have prerequisites. And many of you who are doing capstone projects, you probably should have learned this by doing this. Your final report, some of you are probably really stressed right now about the thought of trying to submit your final report before the 25th of June. Well, potentially, if you had started researching your notes, you could have begun to have written the key headings in your final report, and then slowly, as you go through your assessment and go through the lab work or whatever, you slowly fill in the different paragraphs that need to be written under each subheading. And that way of working is far easier. And believe me, I've had to write over 200-page engineering reports at time, and it's absolutely exhausting once you've done all the work, and potentially you've been working for 2 years and you haven't really written anything down official, and then you've got to sit down and you've been told, okay, write down everything you've done. Oh, that is an absolutely exhausting prospect. It's far better to be writing it as you go along. So that's just a little thing that we can learn from Gantt chart analysis. Here's another Gantt chart. This one is for an engineering project. I think it's basically building a residential site, and you can see that a lot of these activities are joined together with arrows. Why is that? Well, that's basically that prerequisites joining up with their successors. you might see there that some bars, they have multiple arrows going into them or coming out of them. That means they have multiple successors or multiple prerequisites. But it's a very useful thing because it's so easy to see what comes next. You immediately get a sense of how long you can spend on an activity. You've got a very good visual picture of how your activity will affect the project in its entirety, and also the activities that come after it. And the other thing, it's just so much clearer. I don't know how many activities are there. I think you've got 40 odd. That would be very hard to look at if it was a critical pathway network. And this is just a very small part of a much larger project. I think when I worked on the State Highway 20 extension and the State Highway 1 expressway, both those projects were worth about $200 million, $100 to $200 million, hundreds of people working on those projects. I think I never looked at the Gantt chart for the project as a whole, but I think there was probably thousands of activities. You just can't do that with a critical pathway method. It's just not possible. And the great thing is you can actually enlarge or make small different activities under subheadings, and so you can see the level of accuracy that you need. And so it can break down further into sub-activities and sub-activities. That's a really useful thing in big projects. Some people just want to have sort of a surface level look, and others need to know key details of a particular part of the project. And so this is a very, very good way of keeping schedules. Now, one of the big difficulties, though, of a Gantt chart, which the critical pathway method does have the good advantage of, is it's not always easy to see the total slack or the free slack, or to distinguish between the two. But basically, the free slack will basically be if you have successes coming off your project, and all of the successes, there's a big gap between those successes and your activity, then you've got free slack. So an example here would be something like, okay, if you go to line 27, I hope you're looking at this on a laptop and not on your phone, but that's schedule lot stakeout, and that's a very short duration, 1 day, and you can see the bar there. It's a very short bar, and the arrow coming off that is quite a long arrow to another bar called stakeout. That length of arrow there represents free slack. You could delay activity 27 without delaying the next activity. Now, what does total slack look like? Well, total slack would basically be an activity that is not connected to the final activity. So look at those activities right at the start. Review bids, sales, construction. All of those activities happen very early, and they, as far as I can tell, are not connected to any of the activities on the critical pathway. The critical pathway will be the line of bars joined up with arrows that is the longest. That means there's a lot of total slack with those activities in the top 4 or 5 lines. So That's another good thing about the Gantt chart. But yeah, total slack, free slack, you kind of need to think about what they look like. The other thing with this Gantt chart, you can see with each bar there's a person associated with each activity. So you can actually assign the task for each, you can assign the resource or person for each activity. And that's really useful for later on. So one of the things you can do, and this is actually an option with Microsoft Project. Usually I think the default is all of the bars are in blue, but you can say make all critical pathway activities in red or whatever, and suddenly they light up just like that. And so that's a really useful thing too for seeing the critical pathway, because that's not always necessarily that clear. Potentially, if it wasn't color coordinated, some of those blue activities inside there, you might be tempted to think they were part of the critical pathway, but they're not. So that's a useful thing. So how do we go about creating a Gantt chart? So first off, you need to determine all the activities that are necessary to be completed. A work breakdown structure with all of the breakdown of the work packages. That's a great place to start. Generally, for estimating and project initiation and planning, the work breakdown structure doesn't need to be that accurate. It can be you can be a bit more general, but a lot of project managers make a point of, no, let's actually make the work breakdown structure broken down really far and be really accurate, because we're going to be able to use this later on when we start doing Gantt charts or we start doing critical pathway methods. Then you estimate the duration for each activity. So by that you're basically assigning a bar length. The longer the duration, the longer the bar length. Determine the prerequisites for each activity, so which bars must come after others. And you don't have to choose this option, but a lot of Gantt charts, they don't do this, because sometimes you just sort of get inundated with all of these arrows. But yeah, you can join the precursors or prerequisites and successes with arrows. Microsoft Project is great. There's a little box you can click saying show arrows for prerequisites and successes, and all the arrows appear. You unclick it, they disappear, and you're just looking at the bars. So that's a real useful tool to have. So let's look at an example, and I actually don't have Microsoft Project, just so you know. It's quite an expensive piece of software, and I think you can get a student version for free, or a 30-day student version for free, but because I'm not a student, I didn't really feel ethical about downloading it. If we were doing this module on campus, I would actually make Microsoft Project a laboratory that we do together in the computer lab, and I would see if the university could purchase Microsoft Project for this purpose. But here we've got a project here, and it looks like it's a research project of some sort. Read literature, conduct literature review, arrange client visits, prepare surveys, conduct surveys, analyze surveys, write up. Activities 1 to 7, got different duration dates, and you've got different dependencies there, so different prerequisites. So the start date is the 1st of September, deadline is 20th of December. That December is spelt incorrectly there. So can you do it before the 20th of December? Well, you should be able to. Let's have a look. Well, those are all of the activities. We've lined them up in the left hand. So now we've added the bars, and of course the longer the bars, the longer the duration for each activity. and you can see now that the total duration of the project will actually be about 13 weeks, so it's going to finish in the first week of December. So that's great. It means that you're going to get the project done before the deadline. Now, you can see there which projects are prerequisites of others because they're joined up with arrows. Now, the other thing you will notice is that certain bars, they have no arrows behind them, but because of the way they are arranged, you know they are prerequisites and successors to one another. So you can see prepare surveys, conduct surveys, analyze surveys, write up. They are all corner to corner with one another. You don't need to put an arrow for them because it's obvious they are actually dependent on one another. Now, let's have a look closer here. Let's look at these activities here. Conduct literature review. Well, we can tell that this is a prerequisite for the final write-up, but it's not on the critical path at all. It's got a good free slack of about 3 weeks. And it's also total slack. It means it's not going to delay the project finish date. So it's got a total slack and a free slack of about 3 weeks. Now, what about that project, that activity down there? Well, you can tell by the long arrow before its successor that it's got good free slack. It's got about 2 weeks of free slack, and because it's not on the critical pathway, meaning it doesn't join up end to end with projects that connect with the final activity, that free slack is also total slack. So what's the critical pathway here? Well, you can see it there, and the critical pathway will basically have all of the bars that join butt to butt, end to end, from beginning to end. That is the critical pathway. So I think the critical pathway is quite clear with the Gantt chart, and especially clear if you can actually do this using a software where you put the Gantt chart as a different color. So similar to a critical pathway method, that's the critical pathway. The only difference here is actually that instead of the duration being a number, it's actually a length in the bar. So here's another example here, but you can see here that you can actually always edit and change the schedule. The planning of a project is always changing. One delay will happen and it will affect bars afterwards, and you move resources around, you edit the duration. This is an ongoing thing. It's a constant exercise. But one of the things I want to point out to you here is, do you see how some of the bars are painted green and some of the bar is still blue? Well, that's tracking progress. So if you look at if you look at the left-hand column, I think in the third column you've got progress. It's telling you the percentage that activity has been completed. That's a really useful thing for tracking progress, and project managers love that. So this is something that they would be doing. Now, the final thing I want to point out to you is, you can have a moving red line for today's date. And basically that's really a useful thing because you can see where the green line goes over the today's date. You know, okay, well actually I'm ahead of schedule. But if it's actually something that is, it doesn't go up to today's date, you're going behind schedule. So look at some of those activities. Like look at the two activities on the bottom there. The green bar does not reach today's date. Basically there, the project manager needs to be phoning up the project team members in charge of those activities and saying, hey, you're getting behind schedule. You need to work a bit harder, or what can I do to make this possible? So that's an example. Now, there's one other thing I want to point out to you here. Oh yeah, so those activities, they're ahead of schedule because the green bar goes over today's date, and these ones are behind schedule because they're not up to today's date, what I just said. Last thing I want to point out to you is this little yellow dot down at the bottom. What is that? Is that an activity? Well, no, it isn't. What that is it's a milestone. Remember how we talked about milestones when we did project initiation and project planning, and how do you milestones are key points in the project. It could be the completion of phase 2 when you get paid a portion of the fee. It could be the laying of the foundation where you've told all the people, all the workers, you'll have a party, or something like that. You can put milestones into the project as well as activities, and they would just be shown as single dots. Very useful thing. So yeah, one of the other great benefits of a Gantt chart is that you can have partial prerequisites. So let's say your project is actually your capstone project here, and the example is you can begin writing the literature review when you have finished 50% of the literature reading. Well, what does that look like? Well, it's basically an overlap where the arrow of the dependency arrow joining the two bars together comes down at the 50% mark of the reading. So yeah, you don't need to, with the literature review that you did in your capstone project, some of you might have read in one block and then done the writing in one block, but more than likely you started reading and then at some point you started writing, and there was an overlap of reading and writing for a period of time. That's completely normal, but you can't do this with a critical pathway method. Basically, if you wanted to show this with the critical pathway method, you would need to break the activity of reading into two activities, reading part 1 and reading part 2, and give both activities their own activity boxes, and that just sort of creates more complication. So partial prerequisites, where you can say this can begin at 50%, that's a real useful thing, and it shows, and it's very easy to understand that on a Gantt chart. So the other useful thing for a Gantt chart is remember what we said, that the critical pathway method doesn't actually show how resources are allocated or how people are allocated. So remember how Cardo was thinking, I can go easy on the laying of the subbase because if Avan, her activity comes after me, and it's the base course she's doing, but it's not actually that critical, it's no big deal. Cardo wasn't thinking, well, actually Avan is also working on a critical pathway activity and I can't delay Avan. I'm going to put Avan under a lot of stress. Well, you can do this with Gantt charts. For when you do a Gantt chart in Microsoft Project, you choose the option of schedule. So this is actually showing the project schedule, and in in the column on the left, there's a column for resource. Who is going to be in charge of completing that activity, or who's going to be working on which activity? And then there's another option where you can look at the Gantt chart for resources. So you just go to the upper point of Microsoft Project, click on a different form, and it takes you to another page, and this shows you the capacity and the work the work schedules of the different resources. This is not the schedule of the project, but everyone's personal timetables. So this is a really useful thing for human resources. So you can see there that Alex Exler, person number 1, he's got a little bit of an activity in the middle of February for maybe half a week, and he's got a little bit of work in the later part of March, but he doesn't actually have a lot of activity there, does he? That means Alex Exler can probably take on more work. Or maybe Alex Exler and Philip Kaneko, their work, that's the work of one person. You fire one of them, save the money. Just an option. So this is a really useful thing, and it means that you can maybe look at certain people and think, oh, they've got capacity for more work. Maybe I can get this person working on the critical pathway activity, and if we really throw resources at the critical pathway activity, we can reduce the duration, and that will save time for the project as a whole. So really useful thing. The other thing there is you've got bars of different color. I don't know what that means, but it probably means if they are the person in charge of the activity, if they're the second in command, or if they're just minions working under those in charge for each activity. I don't know, but that gives you some idea. Or maybe it's showing that they're working on a critical pathway. I'm not sure. It depends on what option you chose, what boxes you clicked on Microsoft Project. So Gantt charts, their advantages: great for large projects, unlike the critical pathway method. Very good for tracking progress. Again, you can't do that with CPM. And it shows the duration of each activity clearly, because the duration is shown by the length of the bar. You don't need to open and read every box. It also is a very good way of visually showing the slack, the total slack and the free slack. The total slack is how much room there is before it reaches the end of the critical pathway, if it's off the critical pathway, and the free slack is basically how much room in that arrow to its nearest successor. That's free slack. And then the other great thing with Gantt charts is you can have two different Gantt charts, one for the schedule of tasks and then have another one for resources. You can also show milestones, and the activities can be broken down into sub-activities very easily. Great advantages, really useful for civil engineering projects, quite frankly. There are some disadvantages, not massive ones, but yeah, the duration needs to be estimated accurately, just like the critical pathway method. When you don't know you're not very clear on what the durations are, and it's hard to estimate, a third method called PERT, P-E-R-T, that's actually Project Evaluation and Review Technique. That was developed in the 1950s by the American Army. Great system, and it's very useful when durations can't be estimated, so it's good for research projects. Not used too much in civil engineering. We don't cover that in this module because it's a shortened semester. Read about it in your own time though. The critical pathway method, the critical path is not always obvious. It's good to actually have an option where you click. If you do this on Microsoft Project, just click the box saying show critical pathway, and then it shows all the activities that are critical pathway in red. That solves that. Easy problem to fix. But the real difficulty with Gantt charts is that they're very time consuming to update and review. Let's say you actually reduce one bar because you finish it before ahead of schedule. You thought that activity would take you 10 days, but it only took you 8, it's going to take you a long time to completely update and change all the other bars. It's a constant thing. Microsoft Project helps you with that, but the planner is the person in charge of the schedule. He is constantly updating and reviewing the schedule. It's a lot of work. And that's why it doesn't work well in agile environments where the scope of the project keeps changing, where suddenly you have big changes to the project, whole new activities that you didn't know were there before. With the CPM, it's easy to just sort of slot in a new box, link it with arrows to its prerequisites and successes, and go from there. You enter its early start date, early finish date, and then if you've done it in software like Excel or something else, all the other boxes should automatically update. And if the critical pathway changes, that should show too. However, it's a little bit harder to do that with Gantt charts. So that's the big disadvantage with a Gantt chart. So Microsoft Project, I would, if we were doing this module in a 13-week semester, I would be teaching you and showing you a bit more of Microsoft Project. That's not going to happen, but check it out. Your homework, there's going to be a 3-minute outline of Microsoft Project that I'm going to ask you to view. It's a YouTube video. It just gives you a little bit of exposure to what the project software looks like. There is another one called Open Proj, and I've got that's actually the bottom left hand slide. Very similar, a bit cheaper, but most people seem to be using Microsoft Project now. It's very common. So what is the role of a planner? So the planner is the person who's always working on the critical pathway method and the Gantt chart, but he's a very important person in a project management team, because effectively he's the person who's trying to make sure the project is staying on schedule. He has a particular interest in addressing the time constraint. Just like the quantity surveyor was sort of managing the cost constraint, he's measuring the time constraint. And he's always looking for opportunities to reduce the duration of the project. Remember, if you can reduce the duration of the project and the hotel that you're building can be given to the client a week earlier than schedule, well, that means they can start work a week earlier, and that's thousands of dollars of revenue. So that's huge. He's always advising the project manager on the allocation of resources, saying, hey, look, this project here, this activity, this is on the critical pathway, and currently Ivan is working on this, but the estimated duration is 20 days. Look, why don't we get Taba and Cardo to work with Ivan on this critical activity, and that would mean the duration would probably be reduced to 10 days, and that will reduce the overall time for the project. Great advice to give the project manager, and he's always adjusting the schedule on an ongoing basis, and he's always ensuring the team members of the project that they're prioritizing the correct activities. As I said, we have a tendency as human beings to do the work that we enjoy the most first, rather than the work which is most critical. I can tell you that I much prefer teaching project management and engineering economics than, say, concrete technology. I have a natural desire to always work on my project management lectures every Sunday rather than concrete technology. That's just the way I am. I prefer that. But maybe the concrete technology lectures are more critical for me. Maybe I actually have a lecture that afternoon I need to prepare for. So he's basically telling the team members, look, you've got all these activities that you're responsible for, but hey, this activity and that activity, make sure you focus on those. And he's tracking the project progress. He's seeing which activities are falling behind schedule and which ones are going ahead of schedule. And he's always preparing the CPM, or more likely the Gantt chart, to communicate with the wider project team. That's the role of a planner. He's not someone who's planning how are we going to do the project at the project initiation, project planning stage. Planner is a word for scheduler, effectively. That's the project planner. So who manages what? Well, this is just a little bit of a breakdown, and it's very simplified, but let's say you have the overall project, the big head honcho. He will usually have the title of project manager, or more often these days project director, because often there's lots of different project managers working in different parts of the project, so project director might be a more common term. And yeah, he's very concerned about getting the project with the correct balance of the cost, time and quality constraints. Now, last week we talked about cost constraint, and we talked about how the quantity surveyor, he's got a key role in making sure the cost constraint is followed. So he's making sure things are done to budget. He's also making sure there's enough liquidity in the company, in the project team, to pay its bills to the subcontractors and the workers. The time constraint, that is the work of the planner. That's what we've been looking at today. And then the third one is quality constraint. Normally that person would be the QA engineer, now, or quality assurance engineer. Now, we're going to talk a bit more about this next lecture, but project management is done appallingly badly in Kurdistan. You do well in a lot of areas of engineering, but project management, it's very poor. If any of you ever wanted to become a quantity surveyor or a planner in the future and do some studies in that particular area of engineering, and I can assure you, you're going to be under high demand in Kurdistan. You're going to add a lot of value to projects, and it's a really good career. If I was in your shoes, and that's probably the career path I personally would be going down. Of course, I'm interested in project management. If this doesn't interest you, you shouldn't do it. Do what interests you. Less so with QA engineering. Anyone can do quality assurance, but planning, quantity surveying, there's a lot of job opportunities there in Kurdistan, I would say. I think you could probably demand quite a good salary. So, a couple of jokes for your entertainment. So we were ahead of schedule, so we revised the schedule. Now we're way behind schedule because we lost too much time revising the schedule. What we need is a schedule to help us revise our schedules on schedule. That's the work of a planner. It feels that way at times. It took us 5 days to figure out how to finish our work 2 days early. That's why we're 3 days late. So that's why you always have a designated planning team, scheduling team, where the planner is focusing on the schedule and not getting engineers to get sidetracked with working on the schedule. Homework, there's a 3-minute video. The link is on Moodle, and it's just a quick overview of Microsoft Project. Guys, that's an hour and a half. I know the lectures have been a bit longer this week, but I appreciate your patience with me. If there's any questions you have, please let me know. Thank you, and God bless.